Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. This is it, the final look. 2022 Project Orchids. Been filming 9 plants in 3 groups of 3 throughout the season. So what we're doing in the final look is we get out the initial look clip that was filmed in March for a plant, and then update 1, May, so my brain won't work. So we've got clip from March, clip from May, a clip from July, update 2, and a clip from September, update 3. We've got 4 clips that will be put together, brought out, put together in a stream, and then I will film the plant as it is today and discuss how I think it's done through the season and the reasons and everything for it. Each clip will probably have little care tips and snippets of information, but literally we're looking at a plant from March through to now, November. And as there's 9 plants to do, because I'm not doing them in groups of 3, I'm doing them a plant at a time. So we will have 9 videos, 1 for each plant. That plant will be taken through from March right through to November or December, because I won't get them all done in November, so they will spill over into November. So that's the format, that's how it's going to work. So obviously, although this is the 2022 Project Orchids, the format of this final look is different from anything else that I've ever done before. And let's see how it goes. Okay, orchid number 1 is Dendrobium Nesta, and as you can see it doesn't really fit on the backdrop very well. The backdrop is taller than it is wide, and that's the shape of this orchid. It's tall and not very wide, so it's not going to... Okay, we've got gaps at the end of the backdrop. Tough, that's all I can do. Now basically Nesta is a primary cross. It's a cross between Parishii and an osmum, I believe. And as such it needs a much drier, slightly cooler, very bright winter rest to bloom at its best. But the first thing you need to appreciate with these types of long cane orchids is to bloom at their best you need to grow the long canes. That's your job in the growing season. So we're working back to front here, and if you have a look at the canes I grew last year, I didn't do that job very well, and the reason was there was a break. This plant got remounted, and as such it had some major root disturbance, which basically stunted it for that particular year. You can see the normal length of the canes here, and these are the 2 canes from last year. This little one and this one a bit longer. But they weren't even long enough to gain enough weight to become pendulous, which is its natural growth habit. Now this little plant here was a kiki that was taken off. Already that's showing signs of a new growth. That's good. So that means that will grow and produce a cane. It probably won't be full length, but it will also produce roots. That's the important bit. And that's the goal for this plant this year, is to establish a decent root system like it had before, and get some new growths going. We may only get 1, we may get 2. So basically that's the expectations for this plant. But the first thing we can expect is for it to bloom. Now it always blooms on the previous year's growths, and they are normally leafless by the time that happens, which is virtually true apart from this one, which is just hanging on for dear life. So we have got nubbins progressing on the canes here. The nubbins appear opposite where the leaf was, so alternately down the cane. Very rarely the absolute full length of the cane, but if you look at my previous efforts, you've got nubbins from here right back to here, whereas this time on this shorter cane they only go back to here, and I don't believe we're going to get a good blooming this year. But we have got a few nubbins on this cane as well, so we will get blooms on both canes. It's not going to be a spectacle like it was last year, but what I'm after this year is new growths, new root system and progress. And there are two schools of thought with these types of orchids. Some say you shouldn't start feeding or watering until the new growths start. If you do that and it blooms prior to that, then you will drain the resources of the plant. Some also say there are plenty of enough resources in the plant to be able to bloom without starting the feeding. I like to think that by starting the feeding and watering once the buds progress, these are not that I'm not feeding this one yet. This is getting a dribble of water now and again. It's still resting as far as I'm concerned. These little nubbins will eventually push away from the cane, so at the moment they look alongside. They will eventually turn around like that, and then you'll see the buds forming at the end. That's the point where I start feeding. And we will do so, and we'll see what we get. There's a tiny little kiki on the end of that cane that I don't think is going to grow, because that's the cane I'm going to take off. Yeah? There is no life left in that. It's dry and shriveled, and it's ugly, so this one will come off. The other four will stay. They are reserves. So I thought I saw a bud then. They are reserves, so they will stay and feed and store nutrients and hydration for the plant. Yeah, they will help it grow this year by supplying reserves. If you get a plant like this that ends up with too many of the canes like this, you end up losing some of your vigor for the plant, because you can only put so much nutrients into the plant. Yeah, and if a lot of those keep topping up this area, they're not being used to grow. So there comes a time when the older canes need thinning out. On this plant, not yet. Okay, so expectations for this: hopefully new growths both from the kiki and from the main plant, the mother plant, and a new set of roots from both. And hopefully this year we get full-size canes again. So that's number one. Okay, as we are now then, beginning of May, just into May, the blooms didn't quite make it. But I didn't want to delay this group one, update one any longer, because I don't want it dragging on basically. The goal was to get new growth or growths and a new root system and some blooms. So as far as that is concerned, we do have two new growths. So goal number one exceeded, because I was only expecting one. Mainly due to its weakened state from its disturbance last year. So we've got our two new growths. My job now is to push those hard all through this season and get the canes this long, not only this long. Nonetheless, we do have some blooms. Oh, look at the colour inside there. Not quite fully open, but you'll get to see them. What's today? That'll be in every bloom on the 8th, I would imagine. There's no sign of life at the base of the keiki yet, so that's still to go. So goals achieved, two new growths, better than hoped, but the new root systems haven't started yet. I'm hoping to get new roots on both the keiki and the main plant, but now that I've got two new growths, those roots will definitely come. And we'll have the lovely fragrance off of these blooms. The nubbins on the smaller cane from last year I don't think are going to progress, because they would have done it by now, so I think that cane is just basically stalled. It's not going to do anything. So we're stuck with these few blooms this year, and well, we'll have to wait till next year for some more, because it's only a once a year jobby this. Anyway, job now for the rest of the season: push those canes hard, those new growths, and establish a new root system, which I think we should be okay with. Right, before I start on the first plant, you'll see that I've made some adjustments to the backdrop. I've got holes in it so that I can use the hooks, and I've extended it out of there because a lot of people have said that the view through there is distracting when I'm trying to talk about something specific. Unfortunately, I've still got the wall showing at that end. This is a particularly big plant, but you know, if I sort of get into there, it's virtually all backdrop. And somebody suggested, which is a very good idea, why don't I make a screen so that I've got something permanent that I can just sit on the edge of the table that goes, you know, as high and as wide as I want. Well, good idea, but I've then got to find somewhere to store it. Yeah, but it is a good idea. I'm working on that. Right, back to the plants. My plans for this were to get at least 2 new growths, possibly more, and to get them growing to full size during this season, plus a new root system. So far what we've got is the little kiki that I planted up has started a new growth. Whether that can get big enough to bloom or not, I doubt, but it probably will the year after. So this year we just grow the kiki growth on as best it can. My 2 new growths, just the 2, are pushing on nicely, and we do have new root activity. It's only just started, late, and down the bottom here, for future reference, we have 2 more kikis. Now, every time I water the plant, I make sure they get some water to encourage the roots to grow, and as soon as they're big enough and have a little mini root system of their own, they'll go back up on the top as well, the same as this one did, and then they can add to the volume of the plant. So my hopes for this throughout the growing season are to push these 2 new canes as hard as I can and get them as long as I can, because those are next spring's blooms. So so far so good with this one. When we looked at this last time, we had a little kiki here that was just starting a new growth. Well, the new growth has pushed on, so it's grown, and that will give the basis of a plant to produce a nice strong new growth next year. And it's actually produced some roots into the moss. So that was that. Down the bottom we had a couple of kikis as well. Well, we've now got a couple more. We've actually got 4. So this one and this one were the 2 that were just showing last time round, so they've grown on. This would be big enough to detach now, but I'd rather do it in the spring when it's liable to push up a new growth as part of the kiki. Same with this one, so we'll leave them there, and then we've got a couple of new ones just starting as well. But that's got nothing to do with getting this to flower next year. That's the 2 new growths. Now these growths are nowhere near full size, but they are still growing. They haven't reached a terminal leaf yet. So we've still got time. And what I'm hoping with the dendrobiums that all started growing late, many of them didn't start growing till well towards the end of spring instead of at the start. So they started late, so they've got less of a season to grow. But I think because of the brighter light in here, the season will automatically get extended. Proof of the pudding, we haven't got there yet, but I'm hoping these will carry on growing and get longer than this, which was last year's cane, which was pretty poor. You know, this is the length the cane should be. Yeah? If these 2 get to that long, I'll be surprised and well pleased. But so far, what I wanted from the plant, you know, to get a new growth on the little kiki, get some root activity going, and push these 2 blooming canes on for next year. So we're doing okay with this one. Okay, so the final look at Dendrobium Nesta, and as this is the first plant, it always gets the backdrop saga included in, or it has done in the clips, although I did cut one of them out. But basically the update on the backdrop, the actual new cloth that I got went to Hannah to be ironed, which she dutifully did, and loosely folded it to bring back down here, and it creased again. So the position we're in with the backdrop is now back here along with the iron So at some point I will iron it, get the rod in the top and find somewhere to hang it, like in the music room or something, where it can permanently hang and not get creased up. So that's the plan for the longer term view of the backdrop. However, back to the plants. Right at the start of the season, the goal was to grow some new growths, hopefully push the kiki on, get some new roots, and at least get some reasonable sized canes. Now I will have to admit that having changed venues, this is now a new grow room and it doesn't work anything like the last one. It is a totally different environment, and the main difference, I've lost my daytime heat for the majority of the year. Now let's think what effect this has had on the plant. Yeah, I moved in here in December, so the plants came here in winter, so short days, yes, and my heater being used to keep the minimum temperature, but no daytime temperatures. Yeah, so as we moved into spring, we got longer days, but what we didn't get was an increase in daytime temperature. It didn't happen because there was no sun on the glass. So everything started to grow really, really late. Instead of being influenced by day length and the rise in temperature, it was only influenced by day length, and it took a lot longer to have an effect on the plants. It's quite dramatic as well. This particular plant started pushing its new growths nearly 6 weeks late. Now that's 6 weeks of growing season lost. But now at the end of the season we stop and think, have we lost that? What would slow the plant down and signal it's time to rest? Shorter day lengths, yeah, and lower daytime temperatures. Well, because I didn't get the higher daytime temperatures, the daytime temperatures aren't lowering. They're staying where they are. I'm still mainly around 19-20 degrees during the day, the same as I was a month ago. So the only effect that's the plant is having is the reduced day length. And with the lack of shading here, all round and above to a degree, it's bright. It's brighter in here now than it would have been in the other place. So what's happened to the plant? What's the effect I'm getting? The effect I'm getting is our little kiki's done nothing. Well, that wasn't expected to grow because it had finished growing. But it did push out a new growth that's pushed on and, strictly speaking, is still growing. That's not a terminal leaf. So it might produce another 2 or 3 centimetres, but it's not going to be anything spectacular. But it did produce some roots. So it's now a plant that next year should produce a nice strong new growth for the size of the plant. Our 2 new canes, however, have pushed on quite well, and they are far from finished growing. So this is the effect I'm getting. Into November, in the previous place, these canes would have stopped growing probably a couple of weeks ago, but they're still growing. Why are they still growing? Because we haven't had a change in daytime temperature. We've had a reduction in day length, but so far it's not dramatic enough to stall them. So they're still growing. So I think my growing season in this new place is going to start 5 or 6 weeks later and carry on for 5 or 6 weeks beyond where it used to, therefore not being reduced in length. That's the theory, but this is only plant number 1. As for the kikis down the bottom, we've got one here that's a viable kiki with its roots. So is that's a good one. So both of those will come off in the spring and go up there and add to the bulk of the plant. The other 2 are probably too weak. They probably won't do much, but I'm not fussed about those. Kikis on this plant are a bonus. It hasn't done it before. I think that was the only viable one I've ever had. So that's where we are with this plant. We will get blooms on these 2 canes. I don't know how long they're going to be. but they have at least started to arch over and head towards being pendulous, which, if you think the previous year's canes, they ended up sticking out from the plant and they didn't have enough weight. Looking at the size of these leaves, these are already becoming pendulous and they haven't stopped growing. You know, they could grow this much. They might only grow that much. Remains to be seen. But I am quite happy with the way this plant has responded to the move of house, the change of environment, and, you know, everything that's affected it so far. Hopefully, eventually, it will settle down into a rest period that, you know, that might end up starting a lot later and ending a lot later. And we'll see how that goes. It might be that the plant acclimatizes to that lack of daytime temperature and gets back to some sort of normality next year. That remains to be seen. But at the moment, I'm pleased that the plant has recovered from, it got a major disturbance last year, it was remounted, you know, messed its roots up a bit, had to catch up again, and then I moved house, got a totally new environment. So you could say the fact that it survived is a bonus, but it's doing okay. The latest two growths are pushing on nicely. So yeah, plant number one, the final look. So there we go then. Plant number one, the final look for Dendrobium Nesta. A seasonal view of a winter resting type dendrobium taken through from March through to November. Unusual season as discussed. But yeah, so that's the format, and plants number 2 to 9 will follow on over the next weeks. And I hope you like this format. As I said, it's strictly speaking, this is the easiest format I've ever had to do, because all I'm doing is stringing video clips together. I haven't got to do any voiceovers or messing about. Just string the clips together, add a new clip on the end, and away we go. So easy for me, and I hope it's easy on the eye and easy on the listening for yourselves. As I said, you get little care tips, snippets of information along the way. I can't guarantee that, because obviously these clips are pre-recorded back as far as March. But that's the format anyway, so that's what we're going to do. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Plant number 2.